with cultural practices. If we consider that no tradition has formed without the creation of a system that allow the transmission of gestures and materials, include the Arts of Puppetry, Certeau, 1980, then, strictly speaking, to think about transmission is to think about cultural process and in their inferences. Regarding the aspect involving the transmission process, Professor José Alberto Ferreira, in the conference given at the referred seminar, highlight 4 points: intergenerational dialogue, the place of variation in tradition, the power relations inserted in it, and the elements of representation of collective identities. Following Ferreira's path, I will briefly discuss them. Related to the intergeneral dialogue, for Ferreira, the crisis of tradition often find their greatest problem in this connection, when the new generations turn their backs on tradition, rejecting them, as you said. This conflict seems to be one of the fragile points on the practice of transmitting tradition. When the cultural practices inserted in this field relate to the previous generation's way, they can have a connotation of being obsolete, conservative, outdated practices. Concerning variation in tradition, although the theme has been widely discussed, Vancina, Robensbaum, the matter of invariability related to the fidelity and veracity of traditions still seems to remain in the present time. If the transmission is made through material and mechanical device, as pointed by Ferreira, that guarantee the process of apprehension of tradition, this occurring in formal or non-formal pedagogical process, in cyclical festivity, in collective practice, among others, it's open to variation, considering the inevitable updating of lexicons, the reconstruction of objects arising from the access to the new materials or from the absence of others. In the subject of power relations, they are configured and processed both in the individual and public sphere. Regarding the first, the direct relation between individual, master, and apprentice, teacher, and student, always presuppose a hierarchy that often establish contours and define what is hidden and what is explicit. In the public sphere, between what can be sold and consumed. The last point referred by Ferreira on the implication of transmission and is when in it it's possible to verify or claim elements that represent a collective identity. It also raises the question of legitimacy of transmission, as well as the adequacy of the profile and use of knowledge transmitted by its new users. So I think this is a very interesting point, what we are doing with what we receive. Concerning pedagogical practices that establish a relation between tradition and innovation, I found fundamental to consider these 4 points. I will now briefly outline some aspects involving the transmission process of two puppet tradition, the bonecos de Santo Aleixo and the popular puppet theater of northeastern of Brazil, which Mamulengo is part of it. In order to discuss the first, I extend beyond my observation in the field and the previous studies on the subject. The Bonecos de Santo Aleixo, an important legacy of the popular theater of Alentejo, Portugal, was disappearing when its last holder, Antônio Talinhas, who died in 2001, began the process of transmitting the material and immaterial elements of the Bonecos de Santo Aleixo, the puppets, their movement and voice, the textual repertoire, and so on, to the graduates of our Actor School of Dramatic Center of Évora. Ferreira classified this transmission process as philological, once it presents itself as the search for the transmission of a knowledge with a high fidelity to the original. Since then, the new family of puppeteers, the Cia Sendrev, has presented the bonecos to new audience in national and international context, in addition to the usual context of Master Talinhas, was the village of Alentejo. Although the company presents a perspective that preserves the qualities of the object using criteria that identified it with a model of reliable origin received from the master's hand, and stable, not subject to variation in creation, of the three autos transmitted by Talinhas, only the auto da criação do mundo, out of the creation of the world, is regularly presented. Auto do menino, auto the baby Jesus, is staged around Christmas time and almost exclusively in Évora, Alentejo. And the auto da paixão, auto of passion, was present just once. In his article, O Patrimônio Sem Mestre, Ferreira presents a critical revision of this type of transmission process that he calls genealogical type, and which is, in this context, almost exclusively aimed at restoring a primordial text, a ur-text, that best represent the will of the author. In context with the genealogical transmission process, Ferreira cites Ingold, 2011, who submit the model to harsh criticism by pointing out its operative immobility, in fact, the impossibility of ur-text. According to Ferreira, when opposing the philological model, Ingold defends a condition of knowledge situated in context, in progress, open. Even if the impossibility of ur-text and the limitation of philological model are evident, one must be aware of the reverse of this medal, when changes can cause irreparable losses. The research related to the process of Northeast popular puppet theater as a Brazilian intangible heritage, held from 2008 to 2013, revealed that the diversity of the material and immaterial elements of this puppet theater has been considerably reduced. Not only considering the puppet theater presented by the majority of puppeteers of new generations, but also by the old puppeteers. In confronting new contests, the old puppeteers have been obliged to suppress scenes and themes of their puppet show, to replace musician with recorded music, to dramatically reduce the duration of the puppet shows, among other factors that might cause abrupt interruption and the lack of continuity, what possibly will cause loss of both material and non-material components. These practices, resulting from the dynamic set in the contemporary, are driven to meet the new demands of the market, which for norm I do not oppose, but also abrupt interruption and lack of continuity might be the result of superficial glance that generate ignorance and incomprehension of the symbolic structure and values present in the puppet theater traditions. I conclude my speech with one question. What then will be the role of the pedagogy in the face of this process? Thank you. Sorry for my English.
Thank you, Isabella. And you have this way. You have 20 minutes. Karyaj is next. And, okay, she's going to talk about questions of what is tradition, and tradition in the UK, which is multicultural and intercultural and not restricted to Punch and Judy. And also, what do we learn from tradition that is not just form and content? She is a course leader of puppetry at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama and a lecturer at the Exeter University, which teaches puppetry to master students of performance practice.
Please, could you stand up? Please, could you stretch? Please, could you give yourselves a massage on your face? Please, could you yawn? And drink some water now. Shake out and sit down when you want.
Thank you.
Because this is the sleeping time in the afternoon. Please drink your water and make sure that you are not dehydrated. So, oh, please take it away. Take it away. No, no, no. Don't start. Ne pas commencer encore. Toujours. C'est pas... Ouais, merci. Okay, well, I will first start by saying I was a little bit surprised that I was in this panel, so I think I am probably the lightweight or the make-weight in this panel, because I'm not coming from a particular tradition. I'm not a traditional puppeteer, or maybe I am. That's one of the things I'm asking. But I wasn't trained as a traditional puppeteer, and I'm not representing a particular cultural tradition, let's say, of puppetry. But I'm really, really inspired by the broad spectrum of traditional practices, and I'm really interested in this relationship between what we call contemporary theatre and what we call tradition, which are divisions that I am going to dispute. So into this mix, I am throwing a few, hopefully, trying to mix up a little bit this false division between tradition and innovation and contemporary theatre. However, like some of the people on this panel and many people here today, I was also self-taught. So I have been to many master classes. I have been immersed in lots of intensive puppetry experiences over the years. Puppetry training in the UK used to only be a system of masterclasses and workshops, to use Ranjana's division of types of training. So I am going to say 4 things. This is the first one. A little bit of academic interrogation about meanings and understandings of tradition. Often at these gatherings we have a big mixture of more academic and theoretical thinking alongside practitioner reports of work within pedagogy, which is a really good kind of exchange. I don't think, this may be controversial, I don't think it is useful to divide our discussion between what is traditional and what is innovation. I have been very struck in some meetings and gatherings about puppet theatre of the attention that is given to binary oppositions, one or the other. Here we're discussing the relationship between 2 apparent oppositions, between tradition and innovation. In a conference I was in 3-4 weeks ago, there was great attention given to defining the differences between Eastern puppet theatre and Western theatre, another binary opposition. Maybe instead we could start by looking at our meeting places and our commonalities. As Anurupa said, I'm not only going to talk about Punch and Judy, but I am going to mention Punch and Judy. So, is Punch and Judy traditional? Yes. Is Punch and Judy innovative? Without a single doubt. First slide, please. Paolo. The cultural materialist theorist Raymond Williams tells us that tradition is always a living thing which is based on customary difference. This means that our understandings of tradition are identified by what makes them different from other manifestations of culture. However, what he points out is that tradition is never static. Mulhern further suggests that tradition is a process through which collectivities adapt their inheritance for changed conditions. So in this, he's suggesting that tradition, again, is always on the move. Tradition is the meeting place of the past and the future. Within cultural studies, the theorist Stuart Hall tells us that tradition is always inscribed with power relations. So tradition never comes in a vacuum on its own. Popular culture is inscribed with transgressive, subversive, and sometimes repressive meanings. This is no less so in puppetry, but it's something we don't talk about very much. We don't talk about how certain kinds of puppetry have been inscribed or have been promoted as high culture and other forms as low culture. It is clear to me that some of the positioning of puppetry within the academy and within the wider arts is clearly linked to what is considered high and low cultural form, such as the movement described by Katarina Dolenska yesterday about how puppetry has been repositioned within Czech theatre training. I will reflect on this a bit later in the British context too. So the performance of tradition is never a simple act of repetition of form and content. Society, politics, economics, and cultural meanings are always deeply connected. Personally, when I watch traditional puppetry performance, I'm struck by the flexibility and richness of many things. For example, the ability to improvise and to respond to current circumstance, the content of political events, the use of technology, and the self-defining innovative qualities of tradition itself. Next slide. John McGrath, the theatre critic, tells us that through tradition, societies interrogate the myth of themselves. So I would say tradition is always a deeply reflexive and innovating activity. And I will add to this Gerd Bauman's wonderful comment that tradition is a mutually improvised jam session. The performance of traditional forms can lead to communitas, this word coined by the anthropologist and theatre scholar Victor Turner to mean, broadly speaking, the sense of togetherness experienced by a community which has gone through something together. This sense of communitas is also something learned by the child as they negotiate their place within culture. And it's important for identity construction. However, it is often in the interstices and ruptures within tradition that interesting material can arise. So the conclusion of this first point I'm making is to suggest that traditions are always politically and culturally meaningful, that tradition is already innovative, and that another starting point could be to find out what is the meeting point between form rather than the difference. Here are some further questions about this. How long does it take, or how many times does something have to be repeated before it can be a tradition? What is innovation? Is tradition only perceived in puppetry construction, in the social context, or in the content of the material? Could tradition also be perceived in the mode of the puppet world and in its relationship to the audience and other worlds, which is something that Adriana was mentioning or referring to in her discussion of Mamulengo? So my second point is about what we understand as tradition, and here I am referring to the perspective from the UK. The UK is in crisis. This crisis has been coming for a long time and has been created by the hegemony. The UK now, more intensively than for a long time, is debating internally and externally what its identity is in relation to nationalism, ethnicity, multiculturalism, and world power. Long praised among some circles as multiculturally progressive, now in the UK we have fierce and angry debate from all sides of the political spectrum about what it means to be British. 80 people from multiple ethnic and cultural backgrounds have just died in an impoverished tower block fire which successive governments failed to bring up to safety standards. A Welshman, I am Welsh too, by the way, a Welshman has adopted the method of murder by car in an attack on Muslims 2 days ago. But the Prime Minister has been forced to promise to be humble in talks about Brexit. The rhetoric of hate from governments and media, which we have been subjected to, seems to be leading in some way to a profound re-recognition that Britain is a deeply multicultural society. Many generations of immigration predicated on more than 500 years of colonization have led to a hybrid society which cannot be considered in any other way. This means, therefore, that UK puppetry tradition is not Punch and Judy alone. Let us include in UK puppetry tradition Afro-Caribbean carnival puppets. Indian shadow puppets performed throughout communities. And the next one. Sorry, I've got lost with the slides. Okay. Afro-Caribbean carnival puppets, Indian shadow puppets, Victorian trick marionettes, and also, of course, Punch and Judy. These forms are already in dialogue. Punch and Judy processes in carnivals as giant puppets. Indian shadow forms were used by my students last term in a production of Chekhov's The Cherry Orchard. We should not, of course, ignore the issues raised by Rustam Barucha and others about cultural appropriation and recognition and acknowledgement of the sources and the roots of forms. But my thesis here is that we already live in a post-traditional world where forms are not likely to be confined to one geographical, diasporic or cultural group. We must recognize history and be conscious of the multiple overlaps, textures, and intertextual relationships in cultural forms. Ranjana noted that there are 17 traditional puppet forms in India. We have never done this kind of counting in the UK, but when I hear you saying it's a precise number, I think this might be something interesting to do. Paolo? Punch and Judy as represented as Indian puppets on top right, and Punk and Judy in a feminist version which debates domestic violence in the bottom slide, and as giant puppets on the left. Next slide, Paolo. The formidable processional outdoor company Welfare State International, which is sadly no longer, started a tradition of lantern festivals and giant puppet processions as part of popular culture up and down the country in the 1980s. And now, since the 1980s and after, countless villages and towns have their own processions based both on traditions coming from Caribbean culture, but also on the rhythms of the seasons in the UK. These communities consider their performances traditional. From the work of Handspring, Warhorse, which many of us know, and Blind Summit and the English National Opera, could we say that we now, after 15 years, have a tradition of multi-operated animal puppetry in high art in the UK? Can we refer to this as a tradition now? My third point relates to the question of what traditional forms teach us beyond the immediate form and content of the tradition itself. Working with tradition can enable us to learn other ways of working. We do not need to necessarily use the actual forms that we learn. When I was a student, I learned Chow dance from India. I have never returned to Chow as a performer or practitioner, but it did instigate in me a sense of the importance of the earth below my feet, of gravity and of mask work, all training techniques that have been invaluable in puppetry. From studying psychophysical theatre training under Philip Zerilli, which draws on Kalarippayattu, Kathakali and Tai Chi, my master's students become aware of the body-mind connection within performance. Through studying Italian pupi, students are able to experience rhythm, the importance of the performance event and the routine, theatricality, and how to change puppet heads in one performance. This is useful. From watching a variety of traditional performance, students are able to realize that puppets can break frames. Here I will be controversial. Puppets do not always have to breathe in order to emulate life. Puppets can be subversive, squeaky, ridiculous, energetic, dead and alive in the same moment. And the whole aesthetic of why puppets are different from live actors' theatre can be grasped more quickly and easily, drawing inspiration not from live drama, but from art, the grotesque, micro-theatre. And these are things specific to puppetry and to popular puppetry, I argue. They also learn that puppets can and do talk about gender, race, class, and politics. This comes not from the high art practice and tradition of innovation, but from popular theatre. Of course, this leads to friction between practitioners, scholars, and students at times. An angry debate was unleashed a couple of years ago between some Punch and Judy professors at the presentation of Punk as a cross-dressing lesbian. Within pedagogy, students are often greedy and want to know and understand quickly, whereas traditional training does not always offer quick understandings. And now I'm running out of time, so I'm going to jump a little bit. It is not possible for my students not to innovate. The whole premise of their existence as students of puppet theatre is to innovate using whichever materials and resources are available to them. They do not need to be encouraged in this. So very quickly, my fourth point is a little bit about the situation for puppetry training in the UK and pedagogical questions. The wish of the training school where I work, responding to the interest within UK theatre at large, is to define puppetry, again, like Katerina was saying yesterday, as an option within live theatre and not as a separate and discrete art. Partly this responds to professional opportunities. It's much easier for puppeteers to find work as an element within live theatre. Further, the impetus for increasing the status of puppet theatre is driven by a wish for it to occupy high art forms. That is, within the National Theatre, within Warhorse, with the Royal Shakespeare Company, and with English National Opera. And the next one, please. These are high art forms, but this has led to traditional and popular forms being marginalized. My perspective is that students of any form need to know where they come from, but they do not only come from the UK. They have all had to study some traditional puppetry in their first year. This is not for them to repeat or continue these forms, but to enable a greater understanding of the forms and techniques of puppet theatre. Studying tradition teaches us how puppet theatre can work. And it's my belief that all innovation has in some way come from the teachings of tradition. Sorry for going on. One or two interesting projects. Now we are working with Unima India, this project, brokered by a group called Culture Studio, run by British Asians. We will have a digital exchange with traditional Indian puppeteers, whereby third-year students will learn shadow puppetry from the kind that you've already seen online, on the video, through Skype teaching. Then they will work with young performers to create a new touring puppet piece with young British Asians and others, going to schools, theatres and community centres made up of diverse communities. The question of what urban youth wish to do in relation to their roots is influenced enormously by the recognition that hybrid identity is their roots. Second-year students will be working on a multicultural Punch and Judy performance of Shakespeare's Macbeth. First-year students today, as we speak, are making processional giant puppets to use in a carnival procession on Sunday. Other students today are performing shadow puppetry inspired by the traditional Indian forms in a production in London. And one graduate has made a film, a Punch and Judy film, top left, which explores her personal and autobiographical experience of domestic violence. I conclude. The students will be innovative. We don't have to teach them to do that. So for me, tradition is a gateway into innovation. Thank you.
Thank you, all four of you. Now we open the house for questions. We have about 25 minutes for questions.
I would like to come back to the first proposal. On the show, I wanted to know if the company was a family. Sometimes, most of the times, or not at all.
No, the tradition of jongo in Serrinha is a family. The puppet, the ventriloquist, is the son of Vovó Maria Joana, the grandmother Maria Joana, and they were the transmitters of the jongo in this area in Rio de Janeiro. It's a favela, the Serrinha, where in the 40s a kind of samba tradition was born in Rio. The family came from the Paraíba do Sul Valley since the time of the slavery, you understand? But our group, it's not a family. Then we combine a lot of experiences in this project.
And one of the characters was manipulated in the middle, on the top of the castellet, not behind like the others. Is it deliberated
because
choice?
This was just one scene, and it has a lot of plays with this puppeteer and this ventriloquist. Sometimes it's just the actor, sometimes it's just the ventriloquist, sometimes it's a combination, and the booth.
I mean, the one in the middle, there was the older man, the puppet. We could see his feet. He was standing on the castellet, not behind like the two others. Is it because of his character?
Because the glove and the... okay. Yeah, bom, Mamulengo has a lot of techniques in the construction of the puppies. You have the glove, but you have also the... Yes. And you have also the possibility to move mouths and eyes.
So it's a mix.
And they are made of wood. Then they have a certain structure. They don't have a lot of movement, just that could the puppets that can move the legs and the arms. It's like that.
I have a question, Adriana. Especially in collaborations of this nature, it's something we face very often, is the question of what are the ethical issues that arise in terms of ownership, in terms of credit, and when context changes, what are the things that remain primarily? What do you then focus on?
That's why I could not play Mamulengo until now. But here we have a relationship, a very stark relationship with Zé Lopes. He came from Zona da Mata, he worked with the actors, and he did all the puppets, and we did together some other puppets, some glove puppets. I have a long relationship with Mamulengo since 1997. Then the ethical issues for the research are very important in my work. And I think this is totally there because we don't reproduce the Mamulengo. We change experiences, and all the characters that you see there are from this history of the jongo, and they are with us. The two girls that were singing, they were the nephews of the ventriloquist, you know. Then there are a lot of responsibilities, ethical responsibilities in this work, and all of them are from favelas. Then I think you have a lot of crosses in this work, because you have this two economic, historical, important in the historical in Brazil, like the work in the sugar cane, the work in the coffee, They are together in this play. In this play, you have all of the actors and the musicians came from the popular areas in Rio de Janeiro and the favelas. I think you have a lot of encounters in this project, and yes, that's I think these thoughts and actions are connected to an ethical perspective to work about Mamulengo and Jongo and Samba. Is that? It's okay? Mamulengo as a device, yes. Is that? Oh, I was talking about this all of my paper.
Okay, I also have a question about Mamulengo, and I'm sorry if it was said during your presentation, I haven't catch it. I would like to ask about the audience, because on the pictures we have seen that children were watching it, and also adults. Is it for both, or there are like two versions for children and for adults, or it's for family?
For family. Okay,
family. Thank you.
This work is for family in general, but Mamulengo, as I don't know if you can say that, but in a traditional perspective, the master Mamulengueiro Zé Divina says, Mamulengo until 12 midnight. Until midnight is for children and old ladies, but after midnight, he says that. I think it's a good idea for understand. And he says always, Mamulengo is women, fight, and money. Yes, like that, Isabel. Women, fight, and money. Then we can. It's not just for children, but it's possible because the innovation and the improvisation that is very important to this expression. I think. That's possible. It's possible to present to different audience, not just the contextual, the specialist audience. Okay, of course, in this specific spot, you have an experience, a particular experience. But I think this structure for the popular expressions, as Cariadi was talking, I totally agree with her. I think that's the possibility to be very alive and to survive until now. I think that's because of this possibility to have the improvisation to different audiences. Okay.
But can I complete just? I think this what we observed in some areas the groups are mostly live to play for children, and so this is resulting a reduction of the text and the complexity of the Mamulengo and others Northeast tradition, because we have a political problem as well. Because we have a context that it's not operating to absorb this complexity, because they need to live, they need to sell, they need to be on market selling their shows. So mostly nowadays they are playing for audience of children, children audience, and this is a big reduction. In my opinion, what is going on.
J'ai une question, mais elle s'adresse plutôt aux étudiants et aux professeurs qui sont dans la salle à propos de l'enseignement ou de la transmission, plus exactement, des formes traditionnelles dans les écoles. I have a question for students or teachers in the audience, and I have a question about the transmission of traditional forms during the studies. For you too. How it is?
For Rihanna, you said puppeteer in Indian tried to change gas lamp with electrical light or another. But isn't a risk because candle of the oil has a very special signification. Three strings with talking about three divine identities and etc. etc. Isn't a risk to lost something?
I think that the final choice of what aesthetic the traditional performer is going to change it's his choice, it's his personal choice. And how he negotiates this with the audience is between the audience and him. The traditional performers, the shadow players of Tolpovakutu in Kerala, they have a fixed theatre in a temple. It is a ritual. And there are 21 oil lamps. It is magical to those who are not familiar with it. We look at it with awe and wonder. But there are changes, like Karyat said, like all of us agree, that tradition is something which must keep dynamic and changing. And I feel that the change has to come from within the performers, and they must decide what the change is.
Can I just add, one of the traditional puppeteers, he says this, he says, when it comes to you, you will use mobile phones, use the metro. When it comes to us, should I still travel on a camel and send pigeons across the city? And I think it's a really valid question.
So in our search for romanticism, we sometimes wish to freeze something that we appreciate.
Can I add something? I didn't have time to say it, but one of the things I wanted to say is that tradition teaches devotion. I am experimenting with teaching devotion. At the moment, the students are asked to come into the space for some sessions and bow to the space. They are not doing this as any kind of religious activity. But I wonder if it's also possible to give that back to contemporary theatre, this aspect of devotion in some way, outside of the religious context. I just wanted to put that one back.
I don't about religion, I talk about a mythical dimension. Without time. And I think what is important for my grandchildren, I haven't, but for the future, for the next generation, we must preserve and keep and go away in innovation in sometimes, or we must innovation and future is all, and yesterday, the day of the future is a show. I don't. What matter, the future or the future and the history? This is my question. To be or to have or not to have tomorrow.
La question de Lucille n'a pas eu de réponse. La provocation de Lucille n'a pas eu de réponse.
I would like to try a little bit, because when I started to know Mamulengo, I was very shocked. Also, because Mamulengo, for example, is very hard to women. Many times you get on the booth, a puppet raped another puppet. You get that in Mamulengo. then I think to preserve this, I think that's no sense, you know. That's why I think this idea of the devices, the structure, this is very important. This is another thing. It's very ambiguous. I think it's problematic. In Brazil, the traditional idea is a political strategy to put these popular artists in a possibility to get space in the whole discussion of policies in the field of culture. Then, but I think it's okay, it exists, but it's also a strategy. You know, it's very hard. I think it's not one thing or another, but I know what you mean. But we know also that Mamulengo come until here and the other traditional experiences because they have movement, because they are processualists. Né? Then I think it's always like this. I think we don't have to worry about the end of this. I think that will not happen because that's our, we can look to our history and we always see this relation. You know, that's my feeling. I don't know if I am being so optimistic, but I think that's the movement of culture. I think that's the way.
In Romania, we lost a lot of forms of theater, indeed. But maybe it's time to innovation another form of theater, puppet theater, museum of historical puppet theater. And UNIMA can doing this, I think. Can preserve heritage and for history, but not in a box. Immaterial heritage, but not like treasure, UNESCO treasure, like UNIMA treasure. I think it's a moment to assume this. UNESCO is very large head, but UNIMA, I think, must to be a good mother for tradition puppet theater. I think, I'm sorry if I don't upset you.
I would like to ask Karia, but before I just would like to put one thing. It's about diversity. I think one important discussion that we have in Brazil, for example, is the diversity of context of the show. When you set the show, for the puppeteers to live, they have to do just one type of show. You reduce it. So it's, we have to think about the diversity of context that they can keep performing. Because if they are obliged to just perform for children, it will be the same what was gone with Ganduja in Italy. Ganduja nowadays, it's a candle, a children, Janduja. It's a children candle. So all this, his power and his force has disappeared because the market, because...
So I think we have to end with that. And I
Anka microphone.
You talk about puppets, rape, and other puppets. But please, to be honest, rape is happening today in all around. One. And second, Neville Trenter, for example, is not very gentle with this theme. Excuse me. Rape is a theme of today. You say in Mamulengo, a puppet rape another puppet. Yes, but it is a theme about our world, in fact. It's a reality.
I know,
it's a reality.
Yes.
Not for children, but for society is a theme.
Huh?
Why reject this theme? It's a reality. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't know, but well, I won't put this in my scene just because it's traditional. It's impossible to me, and we have to do this discussion. In Brazil nowadays, this is a big problem, even in Carnival, because, for example, in Carnival, there are a lot of traditional marchinhas, kind of samba, but they are so misogynous, a lot of misogynous, but they are traditional. But now the young people don't want to sing that. And now they are created another marchinhas with another perspective. There are another marchinhas, but not more, but not racist marchinhas. There are a lot of racist marchinhas and not misogynous. And I think that's a discussion that it's impossible. We have to fight. We have to do that, because if we believe that art is also a dispute for the sensibilities and the possibility to get another partnership in the sensibilities, we have to believe that our language, what we are saying now, I think it's matter. It's important, you know. Even when we got this intention with tradition. And for the mamulengueiros is also a discussion, because they were feeling when they get out of the Zona da Mata and go to big cities, people don't like the show. And they asked themselves, why people don't like my show? And we have to say, people don't like your show because the pup is raped another puppet. And that's not okay. Oh, yes, but now they are changing. We have women, mamulengueiros, that are women. And that was not possible 10 years ago. I think that's a good thing to think. And the young mamulengueiros are thinking about these issues, these problems. Yeah, I think.
Should we continue? Marte? One question.
Hi, it wasn't a question. I just wanted to add something toward the question of the rape as a theme, whether it is for children or adults. I just wanted to touch on that. I think this can be put in a puppet show for children, but talk about consent. Talk about consent. Take it from the roots of it. Where does the idea of rape start, and so on? And that can be something that these women, the mamulengo, that are women and mothers and sisters and women, right? They can think about this and put it in the shows, and they will address this issue, right? For children, so children understand what is consent. This is what I'm thinking.
So we really have to finish now, and before we finish, I just want to address your concern. I think in 3,000 years in India of puppet theatre, many forms have died out. But puppetry has not died out, and it really is going to outlive all of us. I'm pretty sure about that. To just say that a word like preservation really worries me. Because the minute the word preservation entered the Indian government discourse, we had far worse things than death happen to a traditional form. We had traditional forms being frozen and any innovation being prevented, and we had traditional forms taken away from the puppeteer, who was considered crude and low art, and being given to high art forms. So this appropriation. So this kind of worry must be kept to us and must never leak to policy, I think, because I think it's a really sensitive subject. And 1,000 years ago, puppeteers were innovating. They had 21 lamps in Kerala right now. They used to have 3. So is that a corruption? Is that improvement? These are all debates. So today, if you want to use a light bulb, I really personally think it's their prerogative, because I'd hate someone, especially the state, come to my show and say, you can't do that because that's not puppet theater. So these are very nuanced questions, but are really loaded with lots of political, culture, policy, nuances. So thank you all very much. Thank you.
We will have a small break, and we will come back at 4:20, please. Thank you.